Hi, Season 2 here. Sorry it's been so long since I've uploaded a tutorial. Been really busy with college and everything and working on music, so I haven't had the chance to really get on YouTube, but I think I need to, so that's why I'm making this, and I'll be planning on hopefully making them regularly from this point as long as I can come up with enough material. Anyway, today I'm going to be showing the inside of a Psytrance song that I've been working on in the past. I don't know. I started this a while ago. I could actually look. I started this one in February, so I've been working on this for a few months off and on. And yeah, hopefully it's going to be a final track on an EP that I'm going to release that's going to be just Psytrance and trance. I'll put information about that in the description where you can find out and keep up to date on when I'm going to release all that. Otherwise, I just want to kind of show you the synthesis and some of the things that I did to make this. I built all of this from the ground up. I made most of the samples that are in here myself, or they come directly from FL Studio. I think there's like one or two, like these ones right here, that are from FL Studio. The rest are actually pulled from recording, or the other instruments are all synthesized. So I can kind of go into detail on how I did that. I lied. There's actually two, maybe one or two more samples from FL Studio that I used besides like the drums and stuff. So yeah, I'm just gonna start, I guess, with playing a little bit of the song. I'm gonna not play it all at once. I'm gonna just play sections so you can kind of get a feel for it. And I'll pause in between each one of those. So I'm gonna start with the intro, which is really basic as of this point. It's not completely finished. I'm going to be kind of evil and not give you what happens right there, even though it just built up to it. I'm going to start by explaining kind of what happens and what I thought of when I was making this and how I actually made this. First off, I want to play this little part before because it is kind of significant, but not really. It's right before the song starts. I accidentally skipped it. So I guess I can start with how I made that. I just took a sample, and I think it's from this sample pack that I downloaded online, which is really weird, and I don't even know how I ended up finding it. I think my friend and I were talking about making like Raga Jungle for a while, so we were trying to find like these samples that sounded like Jamaican guys talking, because it would sound really cool over drum and bass into like a Raga Jungle feel. And so we downloaded this sample pack from like Ra's Kitchen or something. This dude, I guess he cooks food and everything. It's interesting. There's some weird samples in there. But I think I took the Boatland, man. So this is what it sounds like originally.
It's a Boatland, man.
And I manipulated it. I don't know why I chose it. It was just a sample he has an interesting texture in his voice if you listen to it.
It's a Boatland, man.
It's like really, I don't know. It's something about it. So I figured it would sound kind of interesting, slowed down and with effects. So that's what I did. I reversed it first, and then I guess I'll go through and show the sound and then the effects that I have on it and just like add them on as it goes, so you can hear like the different levels of it. It's not that many effects actually. It's mostly just the pitch shifting that I did downward and then the reversing that did most of the work. So here's no effects, just the pitch shifting and the reversing. It's going into a reverb that I have in a bus. So the way, actually, I'll explain how that works because that's really helpful, and I didn't use this a while ago. Basically, you put a reverb of some sort. I used ambiance, and then you turn the dry all the way down, and then you just select your channel, and then you turn up the volume in there to make it send to there. So it only sends wet reverb, and that's really helpful because you can send all your tracks to this, and then you can do like equalization on the reverb across the entire track. And it also cuts down on the CPU usage insane amounts because you don't have reverb calculations in every single channel. You only have one for all the channels going into one place. So it saves CPU if you have a CPU that doesn't process very well, or it's just a slower CPU. Maybe you have an old computer, or you're just someone trying to make music on a basic computer and you don't have a computer. I have a gaming computer, so it's really easy for me to run FL Studio in it. But for other people, it's really helpful to have this. And you can like filter out lows and stuff so that you don't get random stuff you don't want in the reverb happening in the background. Really helpful technique. Anyway, so that's what you're hearing. You're hearing it with just pitch shifting, reverse, and with a little bit of reverb. So I'm going to add on the next effect, which is the wave shaper. And I think it looked like this. I don't know if this is a preset or not. I think it might have been. It's kind of lazy. Just try it out stuff and see what would sound good for that effect. That just made it more, it distorted it. Made it a little bit more interesting of a texture. That was what I was trying to find. Like a trippy texture. And then the flanger was what was most interesting. So I actually have the rate of the flanger, which is this one, changing. So it starts out high and goes down to really low across this little section. And so that's what that sounds like. Then the last effect I did was EQ, just to pull out some of the lows and the stuff that was kind of in the muddy region. That's not anything too significant. It just sounds better. Anyway, that's how I made the trippy sound right then. It's not that awesome. It's pretty cool. But, I mean, that's one way you can go about making interesting sounds. And you can, like, for instance, like, I could have taken, if I had made this first, I might have taken this sound and, like, chopped it and used it as, like, some kind of instrument in the song. But I didn't. So that's how I introduced the song. Right off the bat, the first thing I came up with when I made this song, I can actually play it because I still have it almost exactly as it was, just minus like slight tweaks in production. This is what I came up with. I mean, that's really basic, but it sounds cool. And so the bass I synthesized. It wasn't too bad to synthesize, actually. So what I did is I just took, this is like your basic Psytrance synth, basically, just a side, or just a sawtooth wave, no detuning, nothing. It's just basic, no phase randomness, none of those effects. They usually don't sound very good with this kind of like clean Psytrance bass. You can use them, like, by all means, you can figure it out, but I don't particularly like the way that it sounds when I do it because I probably am not doing it in a way that makes it sound good. Then I have a volume envelope on it to kind of like cut it out quickly rather than like if I held it, it would. So I guess I'll play it. If I played it, like, it would sustain, but it's at a low volume. And it's also feeding into the reverb as well, just because it sounds good on the highs. The next thing that I did was I did a cutoff automation, or not automation, envelope. And I have the amount set pretty high, and then it cuts down quickly. That's what gives it the, rather than sounding like, this is what it would sound like if it didn't have that, because I have it turned up all the way. But I have it set to do that. And this also has a sustain, just like the other one. And then I use this type of filter. I mean, this is pretty basic. Like, this isn't too intense. Like, it sounds good, but mostly that's because of the way that it fits into the mix. Like, alone, this isn't that special. You could find something like that, minus the effects in the mixer on, like, a basic synthesizer. Probably even a synthesizer like Toy. It's not too, like, intensive. But most of what adds to it is... That's it without any effects. And then it's still going to that. I guess I'll turn the reverb off. That's the basic one. Then there's a little bit of compression, and it's sidechain compressing, so that it goes with the kick. And then there's EQ. So I pulled out a lot of the lows, and then I emphasized this particular frequency that I liked. So I'll play the loop. I'll play it without. So right now it doesn't have any EQ. Now it does. No EQ. It's a specific frequency right here that sounded good to me, and I wanted to emphasize it, so that's what I did. And then I have this wave shaper on here. This comes in place later. It's not really significant in this part. I don't have it doing anything. It's turned down all the way. And then I have a flanger, and I believe... I think this flanger actually isn't being used. This is just for the end of the song, in this part where I messed with some of the effects, so that's not significant. Basically, this is really simple. It's a sidechain compressor and an EQ. That's it for the bass, and it goes into the reverb that almost everything else goes into. Just a very slight amount, though. And that's about it for that. The kick is a sample. It's actually an FL Studio one. And I don't think I did anything to it. Yeah, I didn't do anything to it. Just used it. Oh, actually I did. I did a pitch modification to it. So I had a pitch envelope so that it would sound a little bit higher pitch at the beginning, just to give it a more Psytrance-y sound. Otherwise, I didn't tweak it at all. Sometimes you don't need to do it. It just works how it is. And that's what happened with this one. But that's getting fed into a bus, which is for a filter, and I think it's for like the bass and everything, so I can filter them all out together. And that's not actually doing anything to the sound of it as we speak. It's just so that if I want to, I can filter it with a low pass. So that's like the basic stuff. Like those usually, honestly, I feel like the way to mix is to have the least number of effects should be on anything that's in the bass frequencies. You want to have like a minimal amount of effects on, because once you put too many effects, you completely lose like the groove and like the solidity. Like the bass should be a solid part of the song that is almost consistent, and then everything else should be the parts that are really, interesting and changing, especially in Psytrance. Like you don't want to have the bass with like a flanger regularly, because it just sounds weird. It won't sound right. Or like the kick, like you need to have like something consistent but still groovy. Something important to mention with the kick is that a lot of people forget this, and I forgot this. I never used this in the beginning of when I started producing stuff. You want to have like slight variation in the kicks. Like even though it's the same sample, you want to have like volume modification, because if you don't, it's going to sound like extremely dead. Like it sounds like a machine. And that's why a lot of people who are like, I'm sure a lot of people who are normally trained musicians that look at electronic music and think, oh, it's shit. It's because of that. A lot of people don't use this, and they don't have the dynamics that regular music has, and that's really what makes regular music a lot more interesting for a lot of people, is the natural variation that comes from a human. So you want to simulate that in your music if you want to give it a really natural feel, which you really want in Psytrance, because Psytrance is like probably one of the more organic and like it's one of the genres that tries the most to not be electronic, if that makes sense, in some subgenres of it. So that's kind of philosophically speaking about Psytrance, but you get what I mean, I think. So the next thing I did is I made this little thing, which I've used actually in some of my songs before. it's like the concept of it at least. So this thing. So as you can hear, it has a ton of delay, and all of that. And overall, like, it's pretty much just, once again, it's a really simple sound. I think it started out as a white noise patch and I changed it. This one's a little bit less simple than the other one. It has 2 oscillators. Wow, really complex. No, I'm just joking. It's really simple. You have the square, and they're both the same. I have them coarse detuned all the way down. And then I have phase randomness turned all the way up on this one. One's slightly detuned from the other. And then there's slight phase offset and like slight detuning. Like, it's very slight stuff. Like, it doesn't make much of a difference. You won't even hear it really. And then the volume automation is basically the decay. You don't even hear it. I don't know why I have it like that instead of just as a hold. I just do. I'm going to leave it like that because it sounds good. Maybe I'll notice later why I did that. And then just like the other ones, this also has a filter. So that if I decided to, I would have that, and I do use that a lot. So if I decided to move it down, then I would have the ability to do that, but it still sounds good without it. And then I have a pitch. That's the most important thing, is the pitch. You want to have a quick decay on your pitch. You're going to turn this up basically and then affect the decay. And that's going to give you a really interesting sound. Alone, it doesn't sound very good. It just sounds weird. But once you start getting all the effects on it, it sounds a lot better. I'm going to turn off all my effects, and you can hear what it sounds like. It almost sounds like a kick drum. But that's what it sounds like. And then first thing I added was a filter. And I added another one. Then a distortion. Not really particular about what kind. It was just for like compression and distortion. And the filters were high pass, so that I could filter out the lows because I didn't really want them. I did 2 of them so that I can make sure I got all of it. And then there's an EQ doing the same thing just to like be redundant, basically. So now, like, you can see it's like all up in that section. And there's a slight stereo enhancer so that it kind of goes into the stereo more. And then the delay, which is the most important part. Then there's another filter. I don't know why I have that. I think it's just to make sure that the very, very, very tiny things get out. Because I really don't like to have anything in that range. Because I don't know why. It just makes me paranoid. And then I have a formula controller that's doing automation to one of these filters as it plays. Yeah. The first one. So it's modifying it constantly. And I did that. You put the formula controller in, and then you do link to controller, and you choose the controller that you want. I did formula controller, and I did times 0.75 for the factor. So that's how I made that. I'm going to explain how I made those interesting sounds too. So one thing you can do is you can go pick a synth thing and hit edit events, right? And at first it will open a window. You just close the window. And then those effects will appear inside here. If you go to here and then you go down, right click this square, then you pick the one that you just touched. Okay, so I just touched filter frequency X, and I have like this drawn in. So as the pattern goes through, it does this with the effect, and you can hear that right here. Yeah, if I can get the controller to come up, you'll be able to see. So, yeah, so that happens every time the pattern goes through. So that's an interesting concept that I don't think I really used until this track. So yeah, that's how I made the sounds there. And I also have this crash that's played throughout. And that sounds like this. I'm trying to figure out which, I think these are the only ones that affect it, so it's not going to mess with it. Yeah, so for the interesting stereo effects on that, I just had the crash cymbal to start. It's in 19. So it's just a phaser over it, then a delay, and then there's an auto panning. And what I'm doing here is I'm modifying the auto panning so it goes from like really slow to fast as the section increases, kind of like causing a new flowing sound to it. So it goes kind of like this. You can see the speed increasing. So aside from the crash, there's not too much going on in this part. There's the crash, kick, bass, and the main synth, which I'm editing a lot of different effects for. In this section, I have, as you can see, I did this the same way as the filter's frequency modulation, or the cutoff. I did it for the stereo phase randomness and for the channel volume. And so that's just random things. Like now you would know that those are things you can edit. And the sample is actually, I recorded this. I didn't make it, but I had my girlfriend record a bunch of random phrases, words, sounds, and stuff, and then I used them every once in a while in songs. So, here's the one that I used in this song.
Neep.
And then I stretched it. And then I added pitch shifting upwards, and then it's kind of shittily done. That's a adverb or adjective, whatever. Adverb is what it's called, apparently. And then I did pitch snapping with G snap, so it will just auto tune it to pitches that are in key. And then I just did EQ and just used like Maximus to boost it and sound better. I just used a preset, which I would not recommend, but in that case, it worked out, so I did use it. It sounded good. I don't really like to use presets usually, though. Then it just continues with that, and so there's that section after. Then the next thing that comes in, or actually right here, it's a hi-hat. I think it's actually multiple hi-hats together. Yeah, it's actually a layer, so I use the layer plugin. Then I have it controlling these three. One of them is actually an open hi-hat. No, actually, sorry. It's these two. And so they're not actually processed at all. They just have a lot of, well, they're not processed until they get sent to the hi-hats together one, and then they go out to this same one that I can use to filter things, so the same one as the kick drum. Otherwise, there's not anything added except they do go to the reverb as well. So for the kick drum, there's some tiny little like flares and stuff like right here. You've got And so I can just show you like the volume level and the velocity really does matter in this. It makes it sound better. So that's what I did there. Gives it more emphasis and more, like it sounds more natural. Even, well, the snares actually, I kept the same. Normally, like I would want to have them be a little bit different depending on where they were, but in this case, it worked out fine. The next instrument that I have coming in right here, fading in with this automation clip. It sounds like this. So it's sidechained to the kick. And that one sounds like... So I'm going to take off all the effects except the reverb because it's a pain. It's actually pretty lame on its own without the effects. I mean, I could have done most of this with the effects, but without effects, I mean. It's basically just two. So each of the layer is basically controlling two different synthesizers. And they're both 3x OSC. And they're panned to opposite sides. One's sawtooth, one's square wave, so it gives it a different texture, but everything else is exactly the same. They've got a slow-ish attack. I mean, a quick attack, but it's like not immediate. And then they decay over a long time. They have a huge sustain and a huge release. And it's pretty much the same for the other parts. And then what I did do is I have them arpeggiating upwards, and this is all the settings for that right here. I have the phase randomness turned on. There's this tiny amount of white noise in both of them. And so that sounds like this without any effects. Then I added a chorus. Then I added a limiter, which is for the side chaining. It's set to the compression setting. Then there's D-Blue Glitch, just set up to be a gator effect, and then a stretcher, and then a reverse. So that sounds like... Well, you won't hear it until it's playing. Basically, the whole sequence of it sounds like... The very last part was the stretcher and the reverse. And then there's EQ. And then later I added a flanger into the song, but it's not in this part yet. So, the lead that you hear in that section is actually the same as the slapping the lead one down here. That one. It's the same one that's right here in this section, just doing a different melody. And, I mean, that's just the basic melody. I can't really show how I write melodies because, honestly, I just come up with what sounds good as I go. I plot the notes out. But this song is in E minor because this was originally... No, not E minor, actually. I think it's in D minor. I don't know, though. I, like, vary it a little bit. Yeah, I think yep. D, E, F. Then A and A sharp. Yeah, that's D minor. So, that's the key. Yep. So that's what I did for that. The snare changes a little bit. Like there's basically each section I just add on a new note. I mean a new pattern. And I add I make sure that there's always background stuff going on in most of these sections, except like when it gets intense. So like, for example, I draw out the crash cymbal and stuff. Because in this section, like this instrument is filling in so much of the mix that having these crash cymbals in the back would not sound good. Like I don't need them to have the interest in the song, so they're not there. And they just take up space in the mix and distract. At least that's my opinion. They might actually sound good if you figure out a way to keep them in there. I just didn't want to do that. Anyway. So this actually took a long time to make, this part right here. Basically, the first part of it, there's two different sections, basically. There's this, obviously, in the background. Still going on. There's this. But I believe that... Yeah, okay. So this is an interesting thing I would have to explain. I have this, basically this pattern is for an instrument, and it's controlling the instrument. But it's also all this data and the MIDI is being sent into an auto-tuner that's auto-tuning this vocal sample here. So that's what it sounds like with the auto-tuning on it, with it not being set to a particular note. So with it being set to a particular note with this, it changes it. And it's not crossfaded, so it sounds different. With it crossfaded, it sounds like... That's a weird thing that I did, but anyway. So those are all coming in, because I am foreshadowing, at least in this part, that this is going to be a main component of the next section. There's a little bit of crash to rise it up. Then it does the meep thing again, because it's kind of a theme throughout the song. And as it's building, it also raises pitch in this. There's a lot going on here. It's just this section right here has like a lot going on. I'll try to isolate each section. So the kick is doing this. That's pretty simple. Dropped out most of the other instruments. This one's doing something different. So I have it doing these really ridiculously fast notes and changing all kinds of different things about the pitch and everything. I mean, the velocity. I don't know why I keep saying pitch. And then there's this stuff. There's a crash right here. Reverse, there's that new vocal sample. And then right after it, there's the meep again. Basically, that's what's going on there. These are the hardest parts in songs, honestly, is like the little tiny transitions that make things sound like it's expected that it's going to happen, like a change like that. Anyway, so it changes. That is a sample from FL Studio. And I'm tweaking effects on it. I don't actually remember exactly how I did it, so I'm going to look into it again. So I know that I added delay and like some reverb, so this is automating the reverb amount, this part right here. And then what's all this going on here? Basically, this is an effect that I used, and I thought it sounded kind of like a jet engine going over, and I tried to make it sound more like that. So I used it kind of as a transition, but it took a while to get it to sound clean like it does. So then in the background, I have this effect kind of playing sections of it over and over to give it more like atmosphere in the sound of the section so that it doesn't sound empty in the background, because without that it sounds like which sounds fine, but it's lacking something, so I added this. Like I said earlier, there was an instrument that was controlling the vocals. That's the instrument you're hearing. So this is the full pattern. So I have this layer hooked up to a MIDI out instrument, sending it to channel 1. And then in that effects G snap, I have it set up to receive MIDI data from channel 1. So that's how that works. And then this synth is, you can see the settings right here. Volume's kind of like this. There's a really slight pitch cutoff. That's what adds the... And I don't think there's any portamento on this, actually. Yeah, there's not any portamento. It does sound like it, though, but there's not any. I mean, you can look at these effect settings right here if you wanted to kind of see how it works. And pause the video and check it out, but I'd rather if you didn't copy it exactly, just because I made it myself, and it's better if you make it yourself anyway. Then so that's the new instrument that's swapping out in place of the vocals. It's just interesting, so I kind of wanted to swap between those two to keep it interesting. Anyway, so that's kind of like a similar part. Just the other thing is reversed. There's a new melody here. It's pretty much the same instruments. I'm not going to go over that section. It'll be a surprise. The transition out is... That part's unfinished as of right now. I was actually working on that yesterday. But the idea of it is to kind of go into a halftime type of beat, which I like. So what I did in this section, though, is that flanger I told you about that I had on that background stuff. I used it there. So it's kind of like... So that's with the flanger. It makes it sound really weird. That's the automation curve for the flanger. So these are some interesting things you can do in songs. I'm playing around with the flanger a lot to make it have a more haunting, creepy sound rather than being like straightforward and bright like the rest of it kind of is. song's actually really weird compared to most Psytrance, I would say. It's kind of odd because it has distinct sections and it's kind of like got a lot of different melodies going on. I don't know myself if that's bad or good, but I had a lot of ideas with the instruments I was doing, and I probably could split them off into separate songs and like keep the song pretty consistent throughout, but I like to have songs that have a lot of different stuff in them and kind of like change over time. And basically the way this one starts out is it starts out kind of like, I didn't conceptualize this or like think about it ahead of time, but I realize now is that it starts out kind of like non-melodic and it works its way into being a little bit more melodic, and then it just keeps being more melodic, and then it gets really melodic, and over time it just becomes more and more melodic, and it kind of goes between being like just groovy and semi-unemotional, not unemotional, but like atmosphere based, and then it works its way into being brighter and a little bit happier sounding, maybe to me. I don't know. It could change depending on your culture that you're from. I don't know. For me, it sounds happy, sort of. Maybe it's just me. Comparatively. So to have the flanger again. I don't know why I created that automation clip. There's already one, but I think that it was like a build or something, and I forgot to... I don't know what I did. I did something to the snare. I don't know, man. I'll fix it. Man, my brain is not working. There we go. Okay, so now in this section it'll decide to be full volume. That seemed to fix my problem. Okay, sorry. That was off topic. At least you can see like how I troubleshooted, I guess, right? I just looked around and saw why the snare wasn't working. Sometimes that happens. I don't know why. It probably is something I did at some point. I deleted something that was like initializing the snare as full volume, so it just wasn't full volume because of that. Anyway, so through this section, I'm like working between like this weird broken beat. Well, bad example because I forgot I have a filter on the kick. So this is a high pass filter, by the way, and it's going from like the highest point down, and that's what's making all the instruments sound kind of interesting when they're coming in. So it starts out, you can barely hear them, and then it's kind of progressively gets more low end. So interestingly, you might think that because the way the bass sounds, it sounds different in this first part. I'm just going to play the kick and the bass. Versus the second part, just listen and hear the way the rhythm sounds different. It's really nothing different in the bass. It's the same bass. Just because the kick has a different rhythm, the side chaining makes it sound different. And in the background of the song, it makes it sound way different. Anyway, so what I'm doing in this section is I'm switching between like a broken beat and then like a typical standard, 4 on the floor. And that's kind of, I feel like in this case, building up like tension, because it doesn't sound like perfectly danceable. So over this whole long section I have where I'm doing that and adding in and changing up different instruments, there's like this unresolved feeling of like it needs to be back to 4 to the floor, because it's like I still got the Psytrance sound. And so I dragged that out for a lot longer than I would have normally, but I kind of wanted to keep it that way so that it would add something interesting and it would be more rewarding, I guess, when it comes back. So that's why I really like this transition, because it kind of leads back into a standard 4 on the floor and nothing really changes in the background, actually. Like everything's pretty much the same. I think I add one tiny thing right here. It's just with a different beat, everything sounds a little bit different, and it's still catchy because the melody's kind of catchy. I can show how I made the melody. It's a lot of like, I don't know, it was just improvised pretty much. I didn't play it. I don't even have a MIDI keyboard. I just used programming in the notes and testing them out over time. But I wanted it to sound really like kind of like a guitar solo would sound if it was played as a synthesizer instead. So that's what I went for. Not quite as technical though. And if I remember correctly, this instrument, yeah, it's the same instrument from earlier. It's just, once again, just different. The best thing about this type of Psytrance synth is that you can get so many different textures out of it depending on how you play it. So it has really sharp staccato notes versus like long held notes as there were earlier. So it's like a rhythmic instrument that adds a little atmosphere, which is what I really like. That's honestly one of my favorite synths to use for Psytrance. I think every song that I've done has something like it. I actually just made that transition yesterday, but I just did D Blue Glitch again. And I just changed the length of the gating effect to be like really fast in the beginning and slowly go down, which is what one of these automation curves is. This one, it's these 3 are the ones controlling it. This is like the master volume of the effect. Interesting tip for D Blue Glitch is I would actually, if you're using it for something like this, I have this on the master, I would set it to where it turns off the plugin as soon as you're done using it, and then you turn it back on after, which you can do by creating an automation clip for that, because it has a tendency to crash a lot when there's a lot of stuff going on, and once it does, sometimes it won't ever load back the same way you had it, and if you don't remember all the details about how you had things set up in there, you'll be totally screwed. So pro tip. And another thing is, if you ever change the tempo in your song, even slightly while you're running D Blue Glitch and it's calculating and you don't have it turned off, it'll crash. Even in rendering too. So remember that. Like if you change tempo, like you can't use D Blue Glitch, which is really annoying in some cases, but you can always get around it by like, if you're changing the tempo, you can record whatever it is at normal speed as a sample and then like slow the sample down without changing the pitch as the things change. I mean, it's not easy, but you can get around it. Or you could just not use D Blue Glitch. You could use like gross beat instead, and even if it's in demo version, you can render whatever you record when it's still in to audio file, and then once you have that audio file, you can bring it back in when it will work with the tempo changes and everything, where D Blue Glitch will crash, and that's because gross beat is meant for that because it's made natively for FL Studio. Sorry, that's kind of off subject, but that's probably helpful if you're interested in that kind of effects. This is that melody that I was telling you about earlier, so I'm going to skip over it. So that's a lot of bends, Interesting thing. It's really hard to get that type of, and for whatever reason, bends and things like this, it doesn't really work very well or even work at all most of the time with plugins external to FL Studio. So every time that I've ever wanted to use one of those, I always had to use like 3xOSC, which is fine. It just doesn't have like the same setup as like plugins like Massive, which I used to use a lot and I still do use quite often. So this is just a lot of those. The way that you create one of those type of notes, there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can lay the note down and then click this when you lay it down, or you can just push it down and then hold it and it will change that way. Yeah, so that's what I did. I just came up with another melody. Like, I can't really explain how to come up with a good melody. It just comes sometimes. Like, you can use like circle of fifths progressions and stuff, which I think I actually did explain that in a music theory tutorial on my channel, which you can check out. And that explains like how you use circle of fifths and different things like that to create melodies. I don't think that I used them on this song. I just did it by ear. And honestly, that's the way to go. Like, trust your ears. And if something doesn't sound right, then it probably isn't. It won't sound right to other people if it doesn't sound right to you. And on the flip side, some things that sound right to you may not sound right to other people, because if you're new to this, it might not be as good as you think it is. That's not to discourage you, but I would just ask people, hey, what do you think of this melody? And they say they don't like it, then think about whether you really like it or if you're just proud of it because you came up with it. I ran into that problem all the time, thinking my melodies were really good when I first started making stuff, but in reality, like, they weren't very impressive. I was just happy that I made something cool. And there's like one note that was off, and I was like, oh, it's no big deal, but it really does make a big deal in the end, because that one note, especially if you're making dance music or even like ambient and like IDM or something that has like a repeated theme throughout, if you have one note that's off, it's gonna set off all your notes for the whole song, especially if it's the first thing you create, because you're gonna base it around that, hopefully. And then it's not gonna sound right when it's repeated, and people are gonna get tired of hearing that off note. I mean, and it can always be an intentionally off note. It just depends. Like, if you're intentionally trying to get an uncomfortable sound, then by all means have a note that sounds off. But if you're trying to make something that sounds like a genre that's not about that, then I wouldn't do it. In the case of like IDM or like, I don't even know what you call IDM is a weird term, but yeah, that kind of stuff, like Boards of Canada, Aphex Twin, those types of things. Sometimes dissonance is what they're going for, and they intentionally use notes that would be technically, in like a classical sense of it, would be incorrect or not in key, but they sound good in those cases. So, just use your ears. That's my tips on melodies. Structurally, I don't know. This song, I didn't like adhere to a specific structure. I just needed to make sure that basically the main points are that it's easy to mix for a DJ if you're doing Psytrance. Not super easy though. You want it to be interesting. Like, not quite as simple as like how house music usually starts out with like just a kick or something. With a Psytrance, you want to have like, since Psytrance isn't drop oriented in the way that house now is, or electro now. I mean, most music now is like a drop oriented rather than about like smooth curves up and down throughout the song in the way that trance is. Old house used to be like that, but at this point, most music's drop oriented, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I don't know why I'm ranting about it, but you want to have an interesting intro that kind of slowly builds up, but you don't want it to be too dry and boring. Like, if you can see, like, I start out my song with a lot of stuff going on, and some artists start out with even more, but the main point is that there's not a lot of melodic things going on in the beginning. Because if you have a lot of melody happening in the very beginning of your song, it's going to be extremely, like, it's going to be like that song that's like really good, right? That a DJ wants to play, but they don't have they had to find another song that mixes into it really well. And that's not easy sometimes. So it's better, I think, if you're trying to make your music really accessible to DJs so that they can use it, to make something that is not super strong melodically, right off the bat, because it makes it a lot easier to draw in. It makes it like that song that can be like, oh, I can connect two different songs that are different with. You want to sell your music to DJs if you're going to be playing dance music or making dance music. And for you, if you're a DJ as well, you want it to be easy-ish to mix into, but also interesting. So think about that. You know, if you were a DJ and you were mixing this, what could you do to make it a perfect transition no matter what they're mixing out of, assuming it's in a similar or the same genre? That's really important. Those are the biggest things. You could have a song that's like totally weird in the middle part, but as long as you have two sections on the end and the beginning that are like pretty simple to mix in and out of, like you've set it up to be played. That's probably the most important thing. Like obviously you're not going to get your song selected to get played by a DJ, or you're not going to want to play it if the middle's bad. But you know, if you have a really, really, really good song in your mind and you think it's amazing, make sure that you have, you know, you make it something that can be accessible to people who are actually going to play it, because it's not going to go anywhere if no one can play it, because that's like the main purpose of dance music, it seems like, is for people to dance, but the most playing it's going to get is in the context of an event, so you want it to be able to be played out that way. Anyway, that's my rant about how to make music that's really accessible and still good. I would leave, at least in Psytrance, leave a lot of the melody out of the beginning of the tracks, but still keep quite a bit in. You don't want just a kick. That's usually pretty boring, and it's not house. In the case of house, a lot of times now, that's pretty standard. But I would not do that with Psytrance, because there's not a lot of artists that do that. Not to say that if any artists do that is bad, and I love house music also, so I'm not trying to rip on house by saying that, but in most cases it's true. The beginning and the end are pretty dry. Yeah, anyway, the main overarching thing with Psytrance is you want it to be something that listeners come into at the beginning, takes them somewhere, and when they finally come back from that song, they can be like, wow, that was really cool. You want to take them on a journey in the music and really play with their mind. It's like mind music, but it's also dance music, which is really cool. Your sounds need to be somewhat elusive, hard to pin down, definitely in some cases not natural sounding, but at the same time, you want them to sound human and like something you can latch onto as a human being. It's weird. It's deep. Anyway, you want to take them on a journey. You're basically simulating a psychedelic experience, but in music. So think about it that way. Yeah. Anyway, if you want more information on my music and you actually want to hear the full version of this song in the future, please like my Facebook page, which I'll link in the description. Wow. Follow me on there. Message me there if you have questions. You can put comments in this. I'll check them every once in a while and try to respond as fast as possible. You can private message me. I don't care. I'll talk to anyone. Like, that's what I want, basically. I want to help people. If you have feedback, if you feel like you are more experienced than me, definitely give me feedback, because I want to know if I can do anything better. If you don't feel like you know as much as me, don't be afraid to ask questions. Yeah. If you follow me on Facebook, like I said, you can keep up to date with my music, and you can also see when I'm playing shows. I pretty much play only in the state that I live in, which is Arizona, in a pretty small scene, so I don't play a lot of shows. But if you're interested in seeing like video clips or pictures from that, or I don't know, random updates, you can follow my Facebook page. So there's that. Anyway, yeah, feel free to ask questions. I'm going to try to give more material out, and don't be afraid to ask about other genres besides Psytrance. There are a few that I'm not comfortable with, that I'm not good at. Like, I'm not great with hardstyle or hardcore. In this, depends what kind of hardcore. I know how to do happy hardcore, and I know how to do like UK hardcore style stuff, but I'm not great with like Dutch hardcore or hardcore with really distorted kicks, because that's a really long process, and it's really difficult to actually make those kicks sound good. In my experience with the production of that, I really like IDM and like ambient and down tempo. So feel free to ask questions about that. I'll actually link my other YouTube profile and my SoundClouds for all three of my aliases in the links, because I do more stuff besides just Psytrance. This is mostly my Psytrance project. So if you want to go to those, you can check those out and message me on those as well and ask me about questions on there, and I can put them on YouTube as well. Questions in the future, just look for YouTube videos. I should have some up of my songs. Anyway, see you guys later.